The worst betrayals do not always walk in with excuses. Sometimes they sit on your couch, drink your beer, and dare you to make a scene. That was how I found them, at 8:43 on a Friday night, in the living room of the house I had paid for, repaired, and protected through every storm that ever hit our little corner of Nashville. Vanessa sat on the gray sofa with one leg tucked beneath her, calm as a woman waiting for a delivery. Grant Walker sat in the armchair beside the coffee table, holding a bottle from my refrigerator, wearing the easy expression of a man who had forgotten the difference between being welcomed and taking over. I stood in the doorway with sawdust still on my boots, 12 hours of job site dust on my jeans, and the kind of tired that settles behind your eyes after a day of concrete delays, permit problems, and men asking you questions before sunrise. For a second, I thought I had walked into the middle of an argument. Then Vanessa looked at me, not guilty, not afraid, not even surprised, and told me the truth like she was reading the weather report. She said she was involved with Grant, my best friend, the man who had eaten Thanksgiving turkey at my table, borrowed my truck twice, and once cried in my garage when his own life fell apart. She said it with no tremor in her voice. No apology attached. Just words, clean and sharp, placed carefully between us. Grant lowered his eyes for half a second, but not out of shame. More like a man checking where the floor was before stepping forward. I looked at him first because some part of me still expected the old Grant to show up, the friend I had known for years, the man I had helped find work when nobody else would return his calls. I waited for him to say it was not what it looked like, or that he was sorry, or that he had crossed a line he could never uncross. He said nothing. That silence told me more than a confession would have. Vanessa leaned back against the sofa cushion and folded her arms. She told me there was nothing I could do about it, and if I could not live with it, I should move out. The refrigerator hummed behind me in the kitchen. A clock ticked on the wall. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's dog barked once and went quiet. Ordinary sounds kept moving through the house, while everything inside me stopped. I remember looking at the coffee table, at the two glasses sitting there, at Grant's phone beside them, at Vanessa's phone face down, near the decorative candle she bought last fall. The screen was dark, but the little red recording light reflected faintly in the glass top of the table. That was when the shape of the night changed. They did not just want to hurt me. They wanted me to react. They wanted anger, volume, something ugly they could lift out of context and carry around like proof. The old Caleb, the man who believed decency could still be recognized by people who had benefited from it, might have stepped into that trap. He might have demanded answers. He might have tried to make his wife remember who he had been to her, or make his best friend remember who had stood beside him when he had nothing. But standing in that doorway, with my keys cutting into my palm and my wedding ring suddenly feeling heavier than the tool belt I had worn all day, I understood something colder and clearer. They had rehearsed this moment. Vanessa's posture was too calm. Grant's silence was too useful. The phone on the table was not an accident. So I did not give them the scene they expected. I walked to the small office off the hallway, took my laptop, the lockbox from the lower drawer, and the folder where I kept the mortgage papers, insurance documents, and a few old agreements I had always meant to organize better. When I came back through the living room, Vanessa's expression had shifted just enough for me to see the first crack. Confusion. She wanted me wounded, not practical. Grant finally stood, but he still did not speak. I looked at both of them, two people sitting inside a life they had not built, waiting for me to destroy myself so they could call it justice. My voice came out quiet, almost too quiet for the room. I am not giving you the scene you rehearsed. Vanessa blinked. Grant's jaw tightened. I picked up my jacket from the chair by the door, opened the front door, and let the cool Tennessee air roll over me. Behind me, Vanessa said my name like a command. I did not turn around. The porch light buzzed above my head. My truck sat in the driveway under a sky with no stars, and as I walked toward it, I knew I was not leaving because they told me to. I was leaving because the next move belonged to me. Caleb Morrison drove down the quiet streets of Nashville, Tennessee, the city lights reflecting softly off the wet asphalt, each turn of the wheel echoing the weight of the night before. He kept his hands steady on the steering wheel, feeling the leather grain under his fingers, a familiar texture grounding him in a world that suddenly felt alien. The hum of the engine blended with distant sirens and the occasional bark from a neighborhood dog, ordinary sounds he had once taken for granted, now contrasting sharply with the chaos of his life. He thought about the house he had just left, the sofa, the coffee table, and the way Vanessa and Grant had sat there as though claiming territory that had once been his sanctuary. He remembered the way Vanessa had spoken, calm and deliberate, and how Grant had looked almost expectant, waiting for him to shatter. Caleb's mind went through every detail from the night, not in a spiral of anger, but in the clear, methodical way he had always approached problems at work. Step by step, evidence by evidence, reality first. He pulled into a small motel just off the interstate, the neon sign flickering faintly above the door, and parked next to a truck that bore signs of long hours on the road. Inside, the room smelled of cleaning detergent and old carpet, faintly of coffee from the morning before, and the fluorescent light made the space feel smaller yet intimate, giving him a sense of control over this temporary retreat. He set his briefcase on the desk, opened it, and began organizing papers, receipts, bank statements, and emails, each item carefully arranged to create a timeline, to map the story of what had really happened. Every detail mattered. Small transfers, late-night charges, the messages from Madison confirming suspicions, and the evidence of Grant's involvement in financial irregularities. Caleb moved with purpose, stacking, reviewing, and annotating, feeling a quiet satisfaction at seeing the scattered chaos of the past weeks turn into a clear, actionable record. He thought about the years he had devoted to building a life that now seemed fragile, yet he realized that control had never truly left him. It had only required a careful recalibration. The motel room, dimly lit, offered the privacy and perspective he needed, allowing him to think, plan, and breathe without interruption. Outside, a cold breeze moved through the parking lot, ruffling leaves along the curb, a reminder that the world continued, indifferent to his personal upheaval. Caleb sipped at the thin coffee provided by the vending machine, letting the bitter warmth center him, and picked up his phone to review Madison's messages once more, each word reinforcing the narrative he was now prepared to follow. Evidence first, emotion contained, every move deliberate. The hours passed in a quiet rhythm as Caleb cataloged everything, the hum of the heater and the occasional car passing outside marking the passage of time. He traced his finger along the edge of the folder, confirming that every document, every screenshot, and every note was secure and accounted for. In that calm, measured space, he realized that leaving the house had been the first step not in fleeing, but in reclaiming authority over his life. He leaned back in the chair, closed his eyes briefly, and allowed himself the rare clarity of understanding. He was not reacting to betrayal. He was preparing for the next step with precision and control, fully aware that patience, documentation, and strategy were the strongest allies he could have in navigating the storm that Vanessa and Grant had created. Caleb Morrison spent the early morning hours reviewing every message, receipt, and email on his laptop, arranging them in chronological order on the motel desk, the hum of the fluorescent light above matching the rhythm of his methodical thinking. He traced each detail of Vanessa's recent actions, from unexplained late-night absences to her subtle changes in tone when discussing Grant Walker, his once trusted friend, noting how each small incident formed a pattern that explained the larger betrayal. He reread the messages Madison had sent, carefully capturing the timelines, verifying dates, and cross-referencing with bank statements that indicated transfers and expenses Caleb had not authorized, all while maintaining the calm, steady focus that had carried him through years of overseeing construction projects and managing teams under pressure. Every page, every note became a small anchor, helping him feel the solidity of control in a situation designed to disorient him. Caleb leaned back in the chair, allowing himself a brief moment to observe the motel room around him. The threadbare carpet, the faint smell of cleaning products mixed with the lingering scent of coffee from the vending machine, the window showing the first light of dawn breaking over the parking lot, each ordinary detail grounding him in the present, reminding him that the world continued beyond the manipulation and deceit of the night before. He reflected on the past, remembering the small gestures he had made to support Vanessa and Grant over the years, lending time, advice, and resources, and how those gestures had been twisted into justification for the betrayal. Realizing now that control and trust could be misused by those who understood how deeply he valued both. Caleb then began constructing a detailed timeline, noting the days, times, and context of key interactions, each entry a step toward regaining authority over his life and environment, ensuring that when he returned to face Vanessa and Grant, he would do so armed not with emotion, but with irrefutable facts. He carefully cataloged receipts, highlighting unusual transactions. He printed email threads, circling phrases that contradicted prior statements. He photographed documents and stored them securely in the folder beside his laptop. As he worked, Caleb also planned his next moves with Marcus Bell, the lawyer, mapping out consultations, legal steps, and possible settlements, ensuring that every action was deliberate and precise. In between reviewing the evidence, he allowed himself small, deliberate breaks, gazing out the window at the quiet streets and the first pedestrians of the morning, breathing in the cool air, letting the clarity of the day reinforce his resolve. Each piece of information collected, each note made, reinforced the understanding that the power in the situation rested not with the loudest or the most manipulative, but with the one who remained calm, prepared, and strategic. Caleb understood that while Vanessa and Grant had sought to unsettle him, to provoke an emotional response that could be used against him, his patience, analysis, and careful documentation were the tools that would give him control. He sipped the thin coffee again, now cold but comforting in its familiarity, and allowed himself a final assessment of the materials. Organized, complete, ready. The morning stretched on, light flooding the room, and Caleb knew that the next step, the one that would shift the balance of power, required neither anger nor confrontation, only careful execution, grounded in the evidence he had painstakingly gathered, a quiet force that would ensure he reclaimed the authority over his life and decisions without giving Vanessa or Grant the satisfaction of seeing him falter. By late morning, Caleb Morrison had stopped looking at the evidence like a wounded husband and started seeing it like a project plan with hidden damage beneath the surface. That was how his mind worked. On a construction site, you did not panic when a wall showed cracks. You found the load, traced the pressure, checked what had shifted, and documented everything before anyone tried to blame the wrong beam. Sitting in that motel room near Interstate 40, with cold coffee beside his laptop and the smell of rain pressing against the window, Caleb realized his marriage had failed the same way. Not all at once. Not in one confession. It had failed through pressure points he had been trained to ignore because he loved the people applying them. The first transfer appeared in March. $470 moved from the joint account to an account number he did not recognize. Then another in April, $625. Then $900 2 weeks later, disguised under a label that looked like home expenses. Caleb stared at those numbers until they became more than money. They became footsteps. Quiet ones. The kind someone takes when they think the floor belongs to them. He opened the folder from his lockbox and pulled out the personal loan agreement Grant had signed 18 months earlier, back when Grant had lost steady work and sat at Caleb's kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee like the world had turned too cold for him. $18,000. No interest. No pressure. Just a friend helping a friend breathe. Caleb remembered Vanessa standing by the sink that night, saying he had a good heart. He remembered Grant looking him in the eye and promising he would make it right. Now the paper felt different in Caleb's hand. It did not feel like kindness anymore. It felt like a receipt for the first time his trust had been turned into access. His phone buzzed, and Vanessa's name lit up the screen. He let it ring until it stopped. A message followed. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." Caleb read it once, then saved a screenshot. She still thought difficulty was something he created by refusing to cooperate with his own erasure. 10 minutes later, Madison called. Caleb almost ignored it, but something about the timing made him answer. Her voice came through low and nervous. She said she had remembered something from a dinner 2 weeks earlier, something Travis had said when he thought everyone was laughing too hard to notice. Travis had joked that Caleb was the kind of man who would hand over the keys to his own house if someone made him feel guilty enough. Madison said Vanessa had smiled, not uncomfortably, but proudly, like the joke confirmed something she already believed. Caleb wrote it down, not because it was legal proof by itself, but because it told the truth about the room he had been standing in for months without knowing the floor plan. After the call, he checked the front door camera logs saved to the home security app. Grant's truck appeared in the driveway on 4 afternoons Caleb had been at work, each visit longer than a casual stop, each timestamp sitting there with the quiet patience of facts waiting to be needed. Caleb downloaded the clips, saved them twice, and emailed the log to himself. Then he called Marcus Bell's office and scheduled the earliest consultation available. The receptionist asked if it was urgent. Caleb looked at the motel desk, at the transfers, the loan agreement, the camera logs, the screenshots, and the phone still cooling in his hand. He said yes, but his voice did not shake. Outside, traffic moved along the interstate in silver lines under the gray Tennessee sky. For the first time since he walked out of his house, Caleb understood the full shape of what Vanessa and Grant had tried to do. They had not only betrayed him, they had mistaken patience for weakness, generosity for blindness, and silence for surrender. That was the mistake people make when they only study how to provoke a man and never bother to learn how he thinks. Caleb closed the folder, placed the loan agreement on top, and wrote one sentence across a clean page in his notebook. They wanted the house, the story, and the sympathy. Then he underlined the last word once, careful and straight, and beneath it wrote the next sentence. They forgot I kept records. Caleb Morrison met Marcus Bell at 2:30 that afternoon in a narrow brick office near downtown Nashville, where the windows looked out over a line of parked cars, courthouse steps, and people carrying folders like their lives had been reduced to paper. Marcus was older than Caleb expected, mid-50s, silver hair trimmed close, sleeves rolled to his forearms, the kind of man who looked less like a television lawyer and more like someone who had spent years watching people confuse emotion with evidence. He did not offer Caleb sympathy first. He offered him coffee, a chair, and a yellow legal pad. Then he said, "Tell me the truth in order, not the version that makes you look best." Caleb respected him immediately. He started with Friday night, then backed up through the months before it, the strange phone habits, the late meetings, the way Grant's truck had appeared in the driveway during work hours, the money transfers, the personal loan, the recording phone on the coffee table, and the way Vanessa had told him to leave as if the house belonged to the person willing to say the crueler thing first. Marcus listened without interrupting. His pen moved in short, sharp strokes across the page, dividing Caleb's pain into columns. Marital conduct, financial activity, third-party involvement, property interest, loan obligation, potential narrative manipulation. The words looked cold from across the desk, but Caleb found comfort in cold words. They did not laugh at his table. They did not drink from his refrigerator. They did not call betrayal freedom and ask him to fund it. Marcus finally leaned back and tapped the pen once against the legal pad. "What they wanted," he said, "was for you to leave emotionally, not strategically. There is a difference." Caleb sat still. The office clock ticked above the filing cabinet. Outside, tires hissed over damp pavement. Marcus explained that Caleb should not return to the house alone for an argument. He should not answer angry calls, should not write long messages, should not try to make Vanessa understand what she had already chosen to disrespect. From this point forward, everything needed to be documented, dated, and plain. Plain language, Marcus said, beats dramatic language in rooms where decisions are made. Then he reviewed the loan agreement. Grant's signature sat at the bottom in black ink, casual and confident, as if the future would never ask for repayment. Marcus raised one eyebrow when he saw the amount. $18,000 is not a misunderstanding, he said. It is a debt. Caleb felt something shift in his chest. Not relief exactly. More like a beam settling into the right bracket. For months, Grant had stood in Caleb's life as a friend, a guest, a brother by choice. Now, on paper, he became something else entirely. A man with obligations. A man who had taken help before taking trust. Marcus moved next to the bank records. The small transfers mattered. Not because each one was large enough to break anyone, but because they showed planning. He circled the dates and placed them beside the home security log. Pattern matters, he said. People lie in speeches, but patterns tell on them. Caleb wrote that sentence down. Marcus drafted 3 immediate steps before Caleb left the office. First, all communication with Vanessa would be in writing or through counsel. Second, Caleb would secure copies of financial records and protect joint accounts from unexplained withdrawals where legally allowed. Third, Marcus would send notice disputing any claim that Caleb had abandoned the home, attaching nothing yet, only making it clear that the timeline was preserved. You do not show every card because someone yells, Marcus said. You show the right card in the right room. Caleb nodded. thinking of Vanessa on the sofa, Grant in the armchair, the phone recording on the table. They had wanted a scene because a scene could be shaped. A timeline was harder to bend. Before Caleb left, Marcus handed him a folder with a printed summary and a list of instructions. It was not thick, but it felt heavier than the lockbox had that morning. At the bottom of the page, Marcus had written one phrase in block letters. Do not react for their story. Act for your record. Caleb read it twice. By the time he stepped back onto the sidewalk, the rain had stopped and the clouds over Nashville had split open just enough to let a strip of late afternoon light touch the courthouse windows. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Vanessa again. This time the message said, Grant thinks you are making yourself look guilty by running to a lawyer. Caleb looked at the words for a long second, then saved the screenshot without answering. There it was again, the old trick, trying to make preparation look like fear. He placed the phone back in his pocket, walked to his truck, and felt the first quiet edge of confidence return. Not happiness, not victory, just direction. For the first time since walking through his front door the night before, Caleb knew exactly where the road was leading, and he knew he would not be walking it blind. By the next morning, the first letter from Marcus Bell had reached Vanessa by email and certified notice, and Caleb Morrison learned something important about people who think they control the story. They do not panic when they are cruel. They panic when cruelty stops working. Vanessa called 3 times before 8 o'clock, then sent 6 messages in a row, each one wearing a different mask. First she was offended, then she was calm, then she was wounded, then she was practical, as if they were simply discussing who would pick up groceries. Caleb sat in the motel room with his boots planted on the carpet, a legal pad open beside him, reading every word without answering any of it. The heater clicked under the window. A lawn crew worked somewhere across the parking lot, the distant growl of a mower moving in steady lines. Life outside kept obeying its schedule while Vanessa tried to pull him back into hers. Her last message read, You cannot hide behind a lawyer forever. Caleb saved it, labeled it, and placed it in the folder Marcus had told him to create. Direct contact after notice. That was the new category. Dry words again. Useful words. Later that morning, Marcus called and told him Vanessa had responded through her attorney, claiming Caleb had abandoned the marital home and left her emotionally distressed. Marcus did not sound worried. He sounded like a man reading weather from a window. She used the word abandoned, he said. That means we answer with the timeline. Caleb looked at the folder on the desk, at the front door camera logs, the transfer records, the screenshots, the personal loan agreement with Grant's signature sitting at the top, like a forgotten promise dragged into daylight. He felt the old ache return for a moment, not the sharp kind from Friday night, but a deeper sadness that came from realizing the woman he married had begun speaking of him in legal shapes before she ever spoke to him honestly. Marcus told him the first mediation would likely happen within weeks, and until then, Caleb needed to stay clean. No surprise visits, no emotional replies, no conversations with Grant. Especially no conversations with Grant. Caleb almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because Grant had once been the person he called before anyone else. When Caleb bought the house, Grant helped carry boxes into the living room. When Vanessa painted the kitchen a soft blue, Grant joked that Caleb had finally become a real husband because he owned more than one ladder. On Christmas Eve 3 years earlier, Grant had fallen asleep in that same armchair after dinner, and Vanessa had covered him with a blanket while Caleb washed dishes. Memory can be cruel that way. It does not respect what people become. It keeps showing you what they used to be. Around noon, Caleb received a call from a number he recognized but had not used in years. Ryan Cole, a former co-worker from a commercial framing crew, asked if Caleb had a minute. His voice carried the careful tone of a man stepping around bad news. Ryan said Grant had been talking too freely at a bar outside Franklin, telling people he was about to move into a better life, that Vanessa understood ambition, and that Caleb was too decent to fight hard once everyone made him feel like the problem. Caleb stood by the motel window while Ryan spoke, watching a delivery truck back into a space with a soft warning beep. That sound kept repeating, steady and mechanical, while another piece of the truth settled into place. Grant had not just wanted Vanessa. He wanted access. The house, the comfort, the appearance of winning. Maybe even the money Vanessa thought she could control. Ryan added one more thing. Grant owed people. Not rumors, he said, Just the kind of debts men mention when they stop getting invited back to poker nights and start asking for favors in parking lots. Caleb thanked him, wrote everything down, and sent the notes to Marcus. He did not decorate the facts. He did not add insult to them. The facts were ugly enough without help. That afternoon, Marcus confirmed what Caleb already felt forming in his gut. Grant would not be treated as background noise. The unpaid $18,000, the home visits, the financial activity, the texts, and his role in pushing Vanessa's version of events all mattered. Not because the law cared about heartbreak the way people wish it did, but because patterns mattered, and Grant's pattern was beginning to look less like romance and more like opportunity. Caleb sat back in the chair, suddenly aware of how tired his body was. His shoulders felt like he had carried lumber all day, even though he had barely left the room. But beneath the fatigue, something solid remained. Grant had mistaken loyalty for weakness. Vanessa had mistaken patience for permission. Together, they had built a plan around the idea that Caleb would be too hurt to think clearly. They were wrong. As the sun dropped behind the motel sign and the parking lot lights flickered on, Caleb opened his notebook and wrote one line beneath the growing timeline. Grant did not steal my life. He revealed who was renting space in it. He stared at the sentence for a long moment, then closed the notebook. The next meeting would not be about feelings. It would be about records, debts, dates, and choices. For the first time, Caleb almost looked forward to the room where all of them would have to sit under the same lights and let the paper speak. The mediation notice arrived on a Thursday afternoon, while Caleb Morrison was standing beside a stack of lumber at a job site outside Hendersonville, watching two subcontractors argue over measurements that should have been checked before breakfast. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and for 1 second the whole world seemed to narrow to that small rectangle of glass. Marcus Bell had sent the date, the time, and the address. 2 weeks from Monday, 10 o'clock in the morning. A private conference center near downtown Nashville. Caleb read it once, then again, then locked the screen and slipped the phone away. Around him, the job site kept moving. A forklift beeped in reverse. A circular saw wind somewhere across the gravel. Men in hard hats carried sheets of plywood under a low gray sky. Work had a mercy to it. Boards did not care about betrayal. Concrete did not ask whether your wife respected you. Measurements were honest if you took them correctly. Caleb spent the rest of the day doing exactly what he had done for years, solving one problem at a time, but something inside him had shifted. The meeting was no longer an idea floating somewhere in the future. It had a date now. It had a room. It had chairs where Vanessa and Grant would have to sit near the version of Caleb they had not prepared for. That evening, he drove to Marcus's office with the full folder on the passenger seat. Nashville traffic crawled along in red brake lights, and the Cumberland River looked dark beneath the bridges. Marcus was waiting with his sleeves rolled up, 2 cups of coffee on the table, and a whiteboard already divided into sections. House, accounts, loan, timeline, conduct, witnesses. Caleb looked at the words and felt the familiar calm of a blueprint. Marcus did not waste time. He placed the recording issue at the top, not because it was the strongest evidence, but because it explained intent. Vanessa had wanted a reaction. Grant had been present. Caleb had stayed controlled. That sequence mattered. Then came the home security logs, the transfers, the restaurant and hotel charges, the loan agreement, Ryan Cole's statement about Grant's comments, and Madison's written note confirming that Vanessa had been shaping the story before the night Caleb left. One by one, Marcus placed the pieces where they belonged. It was not revenge. It was architecture, a structure strong enough to hold weight. Caleb sat with his hands folded, watching the life he thought had collapsed become a timeline no one could easily twist. Marcus finally looked at him and said, "The other side will try to make this emotional. They need you to sound bitter. They need you to look wounded in the wrong way. Do not give them that." Caleb nodded. He understood. Vanessa knew how to argue with a husband. Grant knew how to smirk at a friend. Neither of them knew how to fight a record. Marcus leaned closer and tapped the loan agreement with one finger. This is going to bother Grant more than anything else. Not the affair, not the embarrassment, not even being named in the timeline. This debt puts him under the same lights. Caleb looked at the signature at the bottom of the page, remembering the night Grant signed it at the kitchen table, joking that he would pay it back before Caleb got old and gray. Caleb had laughed then. He did not laugh now. The paper did not hate Grant. It simply remembered him. Before Caleb left, Marcus gave him one final instruction. Sleep when you can. Eat real food. Do not let them turn preparation into obsession. That landed harder than Caleb expected. For days, he had lived on motel coffee, drive-through sandwiches, and the hard fuel of being right. But being right did not keep a man steady if he forgot he was still human. So that night, Caleb did something ordinary. He drove to a small diner near the motel, ordered meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and iced tea, and sat alone in a booth by the window. The waitress called him honey without knowing anything about him. The plate was warm. The silverware was clean. Outside, headlights moved through the rain. For the first time in almost a week, Caleb took a full breath without checking his phone. He thought about the meeting ahead, about Vanessa's face when the story she built met the paperwork he kept, about Grant learning that borrowed trust could come due like any other debt. Then he set his fork down, looked at his reflection in the dark window, and saw not a man abandoned from his house, but a man returning to himself with evidence in one hand and restraint in the other. The morning of the mediation arrived with a gray, overcast sky that made the streets of Nashville look smaller and quieter than usual, and Caleb Morrison parked his truck near the conference center, taking a deep breath before stepping out into the cool air. The building was unremarkable, a brick rectangle with frosted glass windows, yet inside, the stakes felt monumental. Caleb carried his folder close, the papers organized, the screenshots and logs stacked, each time-stamped and verified, ready to present a record that told the truth without needing embellishment. Vanessa and Grant entered from the opposite side. The confidence in Vanessa's stride slightly altered when she noticed the determined set of Caleb's jaw and the way his eyes scanned the room with quiet precision. Grant's hands were folded in front of him, but there was a tension to his posture, subtle but real. The mediator, a composed woman in her 50s with a calm voice and sharp eyes, welcomed them and explained the process. Caleb did not respond beyond a polite nod, letting the materials speak first. Vanessa began, her tone measured, explaining that Caleb had abandoned the home and left her emotionally distressed. Grant added a few words, carefully chosen, aimed at framing Caleb as distant and unreasonable. Marcus Bell, sitting beside Caleb, tapped a few notes into his tablet and then turned to present the first item, the recording from the night Caleb left the house. The room was silent as Vanessa's voice played first, calm, direct, and confident. Then Caleb's reply, quiet, composed, deliberate, leaving no space for misinterpretation. The mediator leaned forward, noting the contrast, and for the first time, Vanessa's expression flickered with a hint of uncertainty. Marcus then presented the bank transfers, each highlighted, with corresponding dates and context showing Vanessa's unexplained withdrawals and Grant's involvement. Screenshots from Madison, confirming her observations of Vanessa's planning and conversations, were displayed next, followed by camera footage from the front door capturing Grant's visits during work hours. Caleb watched Vanessa's eyes shift from assured to cautious as the timeline of actions became impossible to deny or misinterpret. Marcus closed the tablet and spoke, laying out the chronology and emphasizing that the evidence demonstrated deliberate choices, not misunderstanding. Caleb remained quiet, his posture steady, letting the weight of the facts resonate without adding a word of defense beyond the documentation. Each piece connected to the next, forming a lattice that revealed the planning behind the betrayal, the calculated confidence Vanessa had relied upon, and Grant's role not only as a participant, but as someone exploiting trust for personal gain. Vanessa shifted in her chair, a small adjustment, as the mediator asked questions, and Caleb noticed Grant's hands tighten briefly before relaxing again. It was a subtle acknowledgement that the carefully constructed facade they had relied on was beginning to crumble under the weight of meticulous documentation and methodical presentation. By the end of the session, the mediator summarized, confirming the clarity of the evidence and the need for structured resolution. Caleb felt the room shift around him, not triumph, not relief, but a steady sense of control restored. The people who had tried to manipulate, intimidate, and provoke him had been met not with chaos, but with preparation and composure, leaving the next steps firmly in his hands. Outside, the gray light continued to filter through, but for Caleb, the clouded morning felt lighter, the road ahead clear, and the balance of power, once assumed lost, returning to him with precision. 3 months later, Caleb Morrison stood in the living room of the Nashville house with a paint roller in one hand and a canvas drop cloth spread across the hardwood floor. The walls were no longer the soft blue Vanessa had chosen years ago. They were warm white now, clean and plain, catching the afternoon light in a way that made the room feel larger than it had in a long time. The settlement had not been dramatic in the way people imagine justice should be. There had been no grand speech, no crowded room waiting to applaud, no single moment where everyone admitted what they had done. Real life is rarely that generous. But the outcome was clear enough. The house stayed with Caleb under terms Marcus Bell had fought carefully and quietly. The disputed money was accounted for. Grant's debt did not disappear just because his confidence did. Vanessa moved out on a rainy Tuesday with 2 suitcases, a moving box, and an expression that looked less like heartbreak than disbelief. Grant was gone before the harder conversations began. That part did not surprise Caleb. Men like Grant liked open doors, warm kitchens, and borrowed trust, but they rarely stayed when the bill arrived with their name on it. Vanessa called once after the papers were signed. Caleb let it go to voicemail, then listened later while standing in the driveway beside his truck. Her voice sounded smaller than he remembered. She said Grant was not who she thought he was. She said everything had gone too far. She said she missed the life they used to have. Caleb looked at the front porch light he had replaced himself 2 summers earlier, the one Vanessa had never noticed until it stopped working, and felt the old ache move through him without taking control. He did not call back right away. When he finally did, he kept his voice calm. He told her the problem had never only been Grant. The problem was that she had looked at his loyalty, his patience, his willingness to forgive small wounds, and decided those things made him easy to move around. There was silence on the line after that. Then she whispered his name, not as a command this time, not as a performance, but as if she had finally found the locked door and realized the key was gone. Caleb wished her well and ended the call. That was not cruelty. It was closure. Now, standing in the house with fresh paint drying on the walls, he understood that taking back a life is quieter than losing one. Losing it had sounded like a phone buzzing on a coffee table, like a friend saying nothing, like a wife daring him to become the villain she needed. Taking it back sounded like painter's tape peeling cleanly from trim, like a coffee maker starting at 6 in the morning, like his own footsteps crossing a room that no longer held its breath. His phone chimed on the windowsill. A message from Rachel Adams, an old friend from a community volunteer project, asked if he still wanted to meet for coffee downtown on Saturday. Caleb smiled, not because Rachel was a replacement, and not because one message could repair what months had broken. He smiled because the question did not come with pressure, debt, or a hidden recorder waiting for him to fail. It was just coffee, a small door, a normal Saturday. He set the roller in the tray, wiped his hands on a towel, and looked around the room one more time. The house was not a monument to what Vanessa did. It was not evidence anymore. It was simply his home. And maybe that was the deepest kind of victory, not proving someone else wrong forever, but reaching a day when their choices no longer write your mornings. So after watching Caleb walk away from betrayal without surrendering his dignity, what do you think was the strongest part of his response? The silence, the evidence, or the decision not to become the man they expected him to be? If this story stayed with you, stay connected with this channel, because some of the most powerful stories are not about loud revenge, but about the quiet moment a person finally chooses themselves.